Obviously in April, the funeral of Barbara Bush, not here, but saying goodbye to her as well. Let's talk about all of this with our colleague, Chris Wallace. Chris is the anchor, of course, of Fox News Sunday and is in our D.C. bureau. Chris, your thoughts on this day?
Well, you know, an event like this really is kind of a statement, Brett and Martha, by the country, what they think of the person that we're saying farewell to, and to a certain degree by the deceased. Because if it's a president, he has played a big role in planning his own funeral. That may sound a bit macabre, but that's one of the honors that's extended to any president, that he plays a big role and often decides who are going to be his eulogists, what music is going to be played, what readings are going to be given. And obviously, because he lived to the ripe old age of 94, George H.W. Bush had a lot of time to plan this. So on the one hand, it's us saying goodbye to George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, but it's also him saying goodbye to us. And you talk about the ceremony. We do know the eulogist. One you didn't mention that I'm particularly looking forward to is Alan Simpson, the former senator from Wyoming, who was a very close personal friend of George H.W. Bush, and laugh out loud funny. And I assume, even on a solemn occasion like this, that there are going to be moments in his eulogy that are going to be acerbic and funny and irreverent. And the fact that Bush 41 wanted him to speak at this august occasion is a statement that President Bush wanted that and wanted that message as part of his farewell.
You know, Chris, this is the majesty of state. This is about as much pomp and circumstance as Washington can muster, other than an inauguration. And we've just seen it, but to hear the Marine Corps band, to hear the Navy choir, to see these images in the Washington Cathedral, it is something special.
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting. During one of the events, I think it was when Bush 41, his remains were put on what normally would be Air Force One. Instead, it was Special Air Mission 41, because the president, when he's not on board the plane we think of as Air Force One, it's never Air Force One. And General Keane, our colleague, friend, former vice chief of staff, was talking with great pride about how beautifully the military did it. And that's something that I think that obviously military men, but the whole country takes pride in, the fact that we are able to carry these events off with a sense of precision, majesty, as you mentioned, exactly on time. And I suspect we'll see a lot of that today. It'll be a lot of heartfelt sentiment. It'll also be a lot of spit and polish, and it shows what this country is capable of when we all gather together, unify, in a common purpose, in this case, to say goodbye to a great American.
Chris, one of the things that strikes me when we watch this group as they're starting to head into the cathedral this morning is the Bush dynasty. You know, we all sort of grew up with Bush 41 and then 43, of course. And you look at these families in American history. The Kennedys come to mind, and the Bushes, certainly. Not every president, when they pass, has this sort of generational relationship with the country. And Bush 41 is the patriarch of a true legacy in American politics.
Well, I mean, think about it. There are only two families that have produced two presidents. The Adamses, back in the late 18th century, early 19th century, and the Bushes. And we're going to have an extraordinary experience today. I don't know. I wanted to do the research, and I haven't. Maybe you guys have, as to whether or not John Quincy Adams delivered a eulogy at the funeral of John Adams. But we're going to see something certainly that for the first time in our lifetimes, which is a president of the United States, George W. Bush 43, delivering a eulogy to one of his predecessors in office, Bush 41, who's not only a former president, but also his dad. And there's no question that'll be the emotional high point of this day, and an historical landmark, if you will.
Yeah,
our research team, the Brain Room, says no. Okay,
well, we talked about it. Apparently he wasn't aware that his father had passed. You know, due to the lack of communication in those days, he didn't even realize that his father had passed, and I believe he did not even attend his father's funeral. So that, you know, obviously this is going to be an extraordinary moment. And then you add to the family. You've got Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, Bush 41's father, who was a state senator from Connecticut as well. Just an ongoing legacy of service to the country as we watch the crowd as they begin to move in here. We are joined here on the set by Dana Perino, anchor of the Daily Briefing. Dana, of course, was press secretary for President George W. Bush. Dana, great to have you with us this morning as we head through this journey, look back and celebration, as we said, in the life of 41.
This is one of my favorite places in Washington. It's one of the nation's great treasures. If you come to Washington, if you don't leave the mall area, you wouldn't know it's here, but it is such a beautiful place and a fitting place to have a state funeral. And of course, as we were watching the crowd go through, and a lot of those people obviously work for 41. A lot of the staff helping worked for 43, and I see them back here and waving to them because it's a celebration of his life. There's their immediate family, and then there's the Bush family, the Bush Republican family, and it's really wonderful to be here, and it turned out to be a beautiful day as well.
There are the Maine folks, there's the Houston folks,
yeah.
There are the administration folks. He touched a lot of people throughout his lifetime, and most of them are in this building behind us today.
Yesterday, I posted on FoxNews.com an article that it was from a former CIA officer. He just retired. He didn't want to reveal his name, but he told me his story. So as told to me, I wrote his story out. He was a young CIA guy, wasn't really fitting in with anybody else. He's a self-admitted jerk, and he's at the lunchroom. He's like to sit by himself. And one day he sees this shadow over him, and he looks up, and it was the director, George H.W. Bush, and he says, "May I have lunch with you?" Sure, of course. So he sits down and he goes to introduce himself. He says, "Oh, I know who you are. And let's talk about you." And in that hour-long conversation, turns his whole thinking around about joining the agency, being a part of it, and he just retired after several decades of service.
You saw the CIA directors all go to the Capitol Rotunda and pay respects, and it was interesting to watch all the different groups. And talking to the organizers, all of them were chosen, those times, that place, by the 41st president.
And in particular, taking over the CIA at the time was not, the morale was low, to put it mildly. The Pike Commission had just finished, and George H.W. Bush was not at the CIA for very long, and yet later on they named the building after him.
It's extraordinary to look at all these different positions that he had, that so many people in his life and who he worked for felt he would be perfect for. You know, UN ambassador, director of the CIA, ambassador to China, all of these. It's almost as if everybody who was in charge really wanted to give him jobs. You know, they wanted him to run these different organizations.
He was willing to take the hard jobs, right?
Yes.
It's one of the great lessons for young people out there. Take the job no one else wants. Who wanted to run the Republican National Committee in the middle of Watergate?
That's right.
And he took it on and was able to do that. And comes you get Reagan Bush. And then you have all of the great conservative moments that lead up to, actually, if you think about the two recent Supreme Court nominations that were just confirmed for President Trump, that was all those seeds were planted early on, and it takes a long time for those movements to really come to fruition.
Dana, we appreciate you coming here because we know that you're going to this service.
Yes, I'm going to go meet my husband in there, and he, my husband and I are obviously very honored to be here. But Peter is British birth, became an American citizen in 2006. I think he will probably be even more teary than me. This means a lot to him and to us, and I'm really grateful that Fox has given me an opportunity to talk about it.
I saw his socks. He's got American socks. Yeah, look good. Well, listen, enjoy.
Wear your crazy socks today.
I know it'll be sad, but we'd love to hear afterwards your thoughts.
I'll be right here, and I'll do the 2 o'clock show from here as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Bill Hemmer, who's here on the great.
Martha, to both of you, this is a remarkable day for all Americans, from sea to shining sea, as President George H.W. Bush. The first invitees were in line over my left-hand shoulder about 7:30 this morning, entering the National Cathedral behind me. And here. We will see a procession of arrivals about an hour from now for what will be a day of history at a place in our nation's capital that is laced with history, the National Cathedral, the first foundation block established in 1907. On hand for that, President Theodore Roosevelt, and the final block to complete the construction, 1990, and present for that was George H.W. Bush here at the National Cathedral. We have seen 4 state funerals, Presidents Eisenhower and Ford, President Ronald Reagan 14 years ago, and today, President Bush. And I think the other thing that will be quite remarkable, as you and Chris Wallace and others have mentioned, is the eulogies by the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, the former Senator Alan Simpson, and when President George W. Bush, 43, eulogizes and says his final goodbye to his father and president, I believe, a remarkable moment for everyone in America. So if you find yourself the best HD TV you can and carve out that will have some amazing images, sounds here in Washington, D.C. Brett, Martha.
About that, a moment in history that we are all about to witness together. And joining us now, we're very pleased to have Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State for President Bush, joining us before you head in. So good to have you with us. Thank you very much for being here today. We just listened to Bill Hemmer talking about the lineup of those who will eulogize President Bush 41 today, and you're going to watch your former boss, W, as he's known, do that. Big day for him.
It's a big day for him, and it's a big day to remember as a country the presidency and the extraordinary contributions of George H.W. Bush. I was fortunate to be on his National Security Council staff, and he really is the epitome of a public servant. He taught me a lot about how to be a public servant.
You know, you were on the National Security Council as the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe Affairs Advisor. This is during the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany. I mean, Angela Merkel is here because she's saying how much the 41st president meant to Germany.
Right. I'm so touched by her presence here. You know, the humility of this man was such that he rarely made it about himself. He never did. And he rarely even acknowledged how important his role had been in ending the Cold War peacefully. I remember the famous story when we went to the Oval Office after the Berlin Wall fell, and it was, Mr. President, you have to go to Berlin for Truman and for Kennedy. And he said, what would I do, dance on the wall? But he also said, this is a German moment and not an American moment. And I think that's what the Germans appreciated, was his faith in their democracy, his faith in their friendship and our alliance. And he managed to ease a great superpower to its end without really rancor or without danger, and that's extraordinary.
It's fascinating because he also pointed out that he didn't want to rub it in the face of Gorbachev, and he didn't want to put him in a difficult position with the sort of iron guard of the Kremlin rebelling against that. And also with regard to the reunification of Germany, that was something that Bush 41 really nudged before some other leaders were quite ready for it.
Not only leaders, but his staff. I remember when he said, well, Germany ought to unify, and we didn't yet have a position as a government on German unification. And Brent Scowcroft said, well, I guess we do now. We're for it. And then we could work to bring others along. And it's really important to remember that for Margaret Thatcher or for Francois Mitterrand, who had been children during the war, it was hard to imagine a unified Germany that could be a peaceful and democratic Germany. And George H.W. Bush really led them to that place through his personal diplomacy, through his reassurance, through his lack of wanting to dance on the grave of the Soviet Union. He allowed Gorbachev to take really difficult decisions along the way. And so we just can't overestimate the role that he played at that time.
And we're talking this week about his accomplishments, both in foreign policy and during his whole term domestically. But a lot of what we're hearing are the stories about his humanity. The stories about the people that he touched that didn't think that they were going to get the letter or the attention or something like that.
Yes, he was the consummate personal touch person. He believed in it, even with leaders. He wanted to be in touch with them, to develop relationships before he had to ask them to do something hard. And it is, to my mind, totally fitting that one of his great domestic achievements was the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it spoke to his compassion. It spoke to his humanity. I'm also just always amazed at how friends around this family from decades and decades and decades ago. That says a lot about who the Bushes are, and my old boss, George W. Bush, very much made in that mold. But this was the patriarch of a great family, and he and his generation are going to be missed.
He also liked to ride his boat really fast. With Putin and his security guard in it, he got a kick out of being able to do those things later in his life as well, right?
Yes, and jump out of airplanes. He never stopped living, and that's the one great thing we can celebrate in this life. This was a life really well lived.
He loved to serve the country. You, like him, served in a number of different jobs: National Security Advisor, Secretary of State. Think about going back in?
No, thank you very much. I've done my part. And in some ways, this is a reminder that you get your time to try and serve the country. You do your very best. You make your mistakes, because human beings do. But what George H.W. Bush stood for, and reminds all of us who had the honor to be in public service, is that you have to have a deep and abiding love for America, a belief in what America can achieve, a belief in what America is, both at home and abroad. And the fact that there are so many people here, they'll be here from Kennebunkport and from Houston, they'll be here from his time in the Northeast, and they'll be here from across the world, because that's the way that he touched people as a public servant. If we can get to the end of our lives and think that we've done that, it's enough.
Secretary Rice, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks
Pleasure to be with
so
you.
much. Wonderful to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
So this is a day that we will watch as America mourns across the country. We have federal offices closed, post offices closed, the market is closed today. They may be thankful for that after yesterday.
That's right. America in mourning as the nation prepares to say goodbye to the former President George H.W. Bush. His casket will soon depart Capitol Hill en route here to the Washington National Cathedral. We have a lot.
Best.
Exactly the sentiment that Condoleezza Rice was just referring to when it comes to George Herbert Walker Bush and his desire to serve his country and to do his best. And he said, then you move on from the stage, essentially, and that he was very much at peace with his contribution to so many of the things and aspects that he spent his life doing. And we're watching, witnessing as the family and friends and colleagues continue to arrive here behind us at the extraordinary National Cathedral, as Dana said, a national treasure to our country. And we await the Bush family departure from the Capitol. We'll, of course, take you through all of that as it begins to unfold here this morning.
Meanwhile, some other news, major developments in the Russia probe. Special counsel Robert Mueller saying in court documents that Michael Flynn, former national security advisor, has provided, quote, substantial information to investigators, and because of that, he should not serve any prison time. As we look at this news, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has more from the North Lawn. John.
Brett, Martha, good morning to you. President Trump has not responded to this, but the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, recommending leniency for President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, citing his substantial cooperation with the special counsel's investigation. In fact, you mentioned it, Robert Mueller is recommending no jail time for Flynn for making false statements about his contacts with the Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. The information that Flynn provided to Mueller's investigation as part of that cooperation deal is spelled out in an addendum to the sentencing memo. Much of it is redacted, but a couple of things that we can glean from it. First of all, Flynn participated in 19 interviews with the special counsel's office and Department of Justice investigators. He assisted in a criminal investigation. We don't know what it is, but so far we don't know of any criminal investigation regarding the president. The criminal investigations have involved Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, Michael Cohen, George Papadopoulos, the Russian hackers, and a couple of related individuals. Flynn also insisted in the collusion investigation by providing information about his contacts with the Russian ambassador, the content of which we have known for a long time. There is one very large redacted section that starts off saying Flynn provided useful information concerning And then the rest of that is a mystery, so we don't know what's involved there. One other hit that we can take from this addendum is that there may be more to come, because citing his cooperation, the special counsel says some of that benefit may not be fully realized at this time because investigations in which he, Flynn, has provided assistance are ongoing. Sharp reaction from the president's legal team to this last night. Rudy Giuliani telling Fox News that the offense and the sentencing recommendation amounts to a crime of spitting on the sidewalk with major repercussions for many. Giuliani says there's nothing in the sentencing memo to suggest collusion and denounced the Mueller team's treatment of Flynn by saying that they are a group of overzealous, media-inspired prosecutors. They are sick puppies. The president also very upset with the way that Mueller has been treating people like Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort. And to bring this all back around to you, I saw Rudy Giuliani entering the National Cathedral in a shot just a couple of minutes ago. Here on Pennsylvania Avenue, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel paid a visit to the Bushes at Blair House a short time ago, and I could see from my vantage point the motorcade assembling, getting ready to transport the Bush family up to Capitol Hill, and then the funeral procession will pass back along in front of the White House later on this morning. Brett, Martha?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks.
Let's bring in Chris Wallace, who is back in the studio. Chris, your thoughts on the news that we got last night as this sentencing memo for General Michael Flynn was released? Obviously, everybody going through that with a fine-tooth comb today.
Yeah, it's a little hard to go through it because, as somebody said, all the good parts are blacked out. But obviously, it must be concerning to the Trump legal team. We don't know exactly what he said. We don't know really at all what he said. But the fact that there is so much there that's blacked out, and also Mueller's reaction, which is to say that Flynn provided substantial assistance in 19 interviews, so much so that they have asked for no jail time for him at all, means that they think they got a lot out of Flynn, and they're responding in kind. So this is substantial. I think one of the other points is that Flynn, by pleading guilty so early and cooperating so early, the Mueller team said led other people to basically flip and to begin to testify, and that was also helpful in the investigation. And this gives you an indication just how much we don't know. Michael Flynn was the president's top foreign policy advisor throughout the campaign. We do know that he had that meeting with Sergei Kislyak in December of 2016. So we really have no idea what he is telling the special prosecutor, but it must be substantial or he wouldn't have gotten this recommendation for no jail time at all.
We'll see what we learned today. Full coverage on Special Report and the story tonight. Chris, thanks. We'll be back in just a bit as our special coverage of this funeral service continues. President George H.W. Bush's casket about to be moved from the Capitol Rotunda, escorted from the Capitol here to the President George H.W. Bush. This after yesterday's massive sell-off, the Dow plummeting nearly 800 points. The last time the markets closed to honor the death of a president was for Gerald Ford back in 2007. You know, one of the things that we talked about are all the people who worked for the 41st president who had this special feeling. I'm wearing this flag pin. This is the Secret Service flag pin. And the Secret Service tweeted out yesterday, everyone's thoughts are on President Bush, and we wanted to share a memory. In 2013, Timberwolf, that was his name, learned that a 2-year-old son of an agent on his detail was diagnosed with leukemia. The detail was going to shave their heads, and you can see what happened in classic 41 manner. He shaved his head, as did all of his Secret Service detail, and you talk to those folks, every person, to a person, says the humanity, the humility, and the honor of the 41st president was something that they truly couldn't even behold. A lot of them will be here today, and they are in the second car behind the casket as it will make its way here to the Washington Cathedral.
I mean, it's an amazing legacy of love and of feeling other people's pain without really wearing it on his sleeve. You know, it was often that behind-the-scenes gesture, and, you know, sometimes people do nice things to get credit for them, and he was not of that ilk. Karl Rove joins us now, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and a close family friend, obviously, of all the Bushes and a Fox News contributor. Karl, wonderful to have you with us on this really special day.
Really special. Great moment in American history. one president eulogizes another president, and it's his father.
Yeah, what about this moment, and particularly that eulogy? For 43, he's obviously been working on it for quite some time. Obviously, they knew this day would come. Talk about that and his thought process.
Well, I talked to him Saturday, and he has been working on it for a while, and he's done it alone. He said, I don't want a speechwriter. I want this to be the expression of my heart about my father. And so I'm looking forward to it today. I think it'll be intensely personal. I think it'll be funny at points, poignant, but it's going to be an expression of him about his father.
You were talking about the outpouring that you expect in Texas as well, the students there. And it's so interesting because when he was president, it was always discussed how patrician he was, that he was a New Englander, that he had gone to Andover and Yale, but he adopted his home state as Texas in such a complete way, Carl.
Yeah, look, like a lot of people in our history, he came from the East and lit out for the West to start a new life. I mean, think about it. He goes to Phillips Andover, goes to Yale. His father is a big muckety-muck with the biggest financial firm in America, Brown Brothers Harriman, and he could have easily slid into that life. And instead, he goes and becomes an oil field tool salesman, first in Bakersfield, California, and then shortly thereafter, Odessa, Texas, and Midland, Texas. Lives a modest life and learns the oil business from the bottom up so he can start his own oil company. And so he's a Texan. He may have been, he was born in Milton, Mass, but he got to Texas as soon as he could.
You know, we're talking about the pomp and circumstance here, but there's going to be pomp and circumstance there that has been planned out as well.
Well, first there'll be the service at St. Martin's, which they attended, which the Bushes attended. The rector there is a friend of mine, Russ Levinson. He has been an enormous source of spiritual comfort for the Bush family for years. He'll preside over it, and then they're going to take the president's body to Spring, Texas, nearby Houston, and put it on a train to go to College Station, 90 miles away. The train engine was painted about a decade ago, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, in the colors of Air Force One, and the train's designation is 4141. And that train is going to take his body to College Station, to the campus of Texas A&M, which he loved. The students there love him, and he loved the Aggies. Literally every night since Friday night, there have been memorials, candlelight vigils, by hundreds of students on the campus every night. And there he'll be taken to this beautiful grove of trees alongside a lovely lake that he used to fish in when he'd go up to the library, and he'll be interned next to his wife Barbara Bush and his daughter Robin.
That is quite something, and it's going to be quite something here for this service. We should point out that you are just obviously very brave without a coat. We've got blankets. We've got.
I'm a Texan. For God's sake. I'd like to say that it was because I was born in Colorado and I'm a Texan, but it's because I had to leave my coat in to hold my seat.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Carl, thank you so much.
Carl, so good to have you with us. I can see that you are feeling very emotional today, and we'll be thinking about you and all the members.
Read my column in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow, and you'll see how emotional I've been getting.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any moment now, the Bush family will depart from the Blair House, where they have been staying. We also witnessed a really nice moment last night between President Trump and the First Lady as they were greeted by George and Laura Bush outside on the steps there. They had never met before, which is extraordinary that we got to witness that moment, given all of the history, but a very nice moment indeed. And this is sort of the official guest house, obviously, of the White House. So they are in there getting ready to head this way, Brett.
And it'll be a massive escorted motorcade escorting George Herbert Walker Bush to the National Cathedral behind us. We'll bring it to you live as it happens in special coverage on Fox News Channel.
You can see I'm hobbling down the hall with my cane. People say, look at this old idiot. They think he's going to go out and make a parachute jump by him.
Screen where the Bush family has spent the night last night just behind the White House. We're awaiting their departure, and we expect that we will see them come down those steps in a few moments.
You know, we mentioned that President Trump and the First Lady met with the 43rd President and the former First Lady, but then we just heard from Carl that they spent a lot of time there, bringing the immediate family, the extended family, and telling stories about the 41st President. There at the Blair House with the current president. You know, we've heard over the past couple of days a lot of personal remembrances of people getting letters written from President George H.W. Bush. A friend of mine and a dear friend of the Bushes, Sam Palmisano, who used to be the CEO of IBM, shared this letter with me that he received back in 2009. This is George Bush, and I'll just read it to you, and because it's just so special. I cannot single out the one greatest challenge in my life. I've had a lot of challenges, and my advice to young people might be as follows. 1, don't get down when your life takes a bad turn. Out of adversity comes challenge and often success. 2, don't blame others for your setbacks. 3, when things go well, always give credit to others. 4, don't talk all the time. Listen to your friends and mentors and learn from them. 5, don't brag about yourself. Let others point out your virtues, your strong points. 6, give someone else a hand. When a friend is hurting, show that friend you care. 7, nobody likes an overbearing big shot. 8, as you succeed, be kind to people. Thank those who help you along the way. 9, don't be afraid to shed a tear when your heart is broken because a friend is hurting. 10, say your prayers. George Bush.
Boy, it is hard to imagine better advice for life and a better summation of who Bush 41 was.
I mean, that letter really encapsulates him. Let's bring in Ed Rollins, former Reagan-Bush campaign manager and a Fox News contributor. Ed, listening to that, your thoughts?
Well, that's the epitome of George Bush. George Bush was a wonderful human being. He had legions of friends all over this country. No politician I've ever known, including Ronald Reagan, who I love dearly. Ronald Reagan was a little bit more of a loner. George Bush was about people, about friends, and every single person that he ever touched remembers him. Many have those kinds of notes from him. That one, not quite as elegant as that one, but he always looked out for the little people. He cared very deeply about this country. As I always described it, Ronald Reagan was sort of the architect and the builder, and George Bush was the finisher. He came in and completed the Reagan mission of changing the world, and it was a superb ally to Ronald Reagan. Was never one moment of disloyalty ever in the 8 years he was the vice president, and obviously was not quite the campaigner that Reagan was, but he certainly was a man with a resume as strong as anyone will ever serve in the presidency he had, and I don't think anyone will ever follow with that kind of a resume again.
It's interesting. Some of the advice in that letter, Ed, comes directly from President Bush's mother, who told him not to talk too much, to listen to what other people were saying, and not to brag. And clearly, her lessons had a huge impression on him.
We're looking at Vice President Al Gore walking in, the former vice president, making his way into the cathedral right now, Ed.
You know, at the end of the day, he had ambition, as anybody who wants to be president has to have, and you know, he got appointed to the vice presidency, and did everything he could from that perspective forward to be the heir apparent to Reagan, and did a very effective job. And Reagan basically put his arm around him and said, "This is a man I want to carry on." And that was the difference between someone like Bob Dole and Jack Kemp and others who also ran for president in 1988.
Talk about the bipartisan effort. We're looking at John Lewis, congressman, civil rights leader, coming in. There are a lot of Democrats and Republicans from years and years and years who will be at this service today. There are a few presidents who could reach across the aisle like the 41st president.
Well, he'd been a member of Congress. He served 4 years in the Congress to sort of start his career. And he wasn't a hater, you know. He was a man who basically liked people, enjoyed their company, respected their points of view, and again, his staff was very loyal to him. The people that are there have great affection in their heart for him, and I think not that they're saddened by his death, they're saddened that he's not here anymore because he was such a part of their life. He had a wonderful, full life, lived it right to the fullest, right to the end, and I think the country was well served by his service throughout his life. Again, every job he ever did, he did well.
Ed, when you think about the political role that Bush 41 played, I mean, he really was a moderate in many ways and sort of struck that balance. He sometimes brushed up against the difficulties of his relationship with the more conservative part of his party. Your thoughts on that legacy and whether or not that kind of politician can continue to exist, at least in this moment?
Well, it's more difficult today, obviously, with cable television and social media and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, he was someone who reached out. He made extra efforts. One of the problems when I was the White House political director for President Reagan, one of the problems he had, he'd go up as vice president and he'd play racquetball a couple days a week on the Hill. And every time he'd go to the Hill, some member would come up to him and say, I need you to do a fundraiser. I need you to do a fundraiser. And of course, George, the vice president, always said yes. So they came back to where his schedule was so full of events for members that he couldn't do the kinds of things he had to do. So I had to take over the role of being no. So he'd always say, I want to do an event for you, but go talk to Ed Rollins. He's in charge of the schedule. So I became Mr. No, and he was Mr. Yes. And that just shows the kind of person he was. So I didn't end up being very popular, and obviously he was well loved.
The good cop, bad cop routine.
Absolutely.
Ed, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. We're looking live outside the Blair House, right across from the White House, where the Bush family is now, as you can see, mobilizing to get into the motorcade to escort the casket from the Capitol Rotunda here to the Washington Cathedral. You know, as we look back into the Washington Cathedral, you know, there are these amazing conversations that are going on before this service starts. One of them we just saw, which was with the National Security Advisor currently, John Bolton, and the former Vice President Dick Cheney. Yeah. And you kind of want to listen in to see what they're talking about if we could, but we can't. So let's bring in Chris Wallace instead. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, that's kind of a pale substitute. You know, it is interesting, and I was looking at that same picture as you guys were, and just as a matter of reality, it is neither good or bad. It just is. Funerals, particularly big funerals, especially state funerals, are kind of social occasions in Washington, which isn't to say that there aren't genuine emotions and people don't feel badly about the passing of George H.W. Bush, but it is an opportunity for people to get together, sometimes from different generations, sometimes from different parties, and particularly this period of time now, which is going to go on for a while before the ceremony actually begins. They mill around like they would at a cocktail party, and they exchange talk. Sometimes it's pleasantry, sometimes it's reminiscences, sometimes it's real business. A couple of other perceptions that I've had watching our coverage today. One is that the general sort of read on George H.W. Bush was that he was famously not introspective.
As always, thank you. All right, welcome to Hannity. Just breaking, big news out of the Mueller witch hunt. The special counsel just released its report on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. You know, the guy that served his country 33 years, 5 years in combat. Now, Mueller is recommending, after all of this time, no prison time for General Flynn. But the damage has been done. Flynn is, quote, a convicted felon, a victimless process crime based on evidence that is suspect. The FBI didn't think he lied. Now, you can't get him on an actual crime, so the old perjury trap always becomes the fallback in the Mueller camp of Democratic donors. This is how America's going to treat a military hero. This is a sad and pathetic moment for not only the special counsel, but for the country. We'll check in with Catherine Herridge. She has been reviewing as we have the full report. We will also react to this travesty of justice. And also tonight, we continue to monitor the dangerous situation at our southern border. Now, while the left actively is promoting illegal immigration with promises of open borders, sanctuary cities, and potential citizenship, on this program, we have always told you the cold, hard truth. And as we speak, there are thousands of migrants stuck south of the border in Tijuana, Mexico, camping out, squalid conditions, and now a daily stream of migrants are sneaking into the United States, and another border rush has happened. Now, coming up, we're going to do something you'll never see on any other network. We're going to break down the serious and deadly risks. The numbers are staggering as it relates to illegal immigration. Also, we have alarming video we'll share with you tonight. Look at this. Young children being dropped over the border wall by smugglers, some as little as 2 years old. And later, you won't believe what a CNN panel said about President Trump because he was paying respect to the late President George H.W. Bush. It's vile. It shouldn't shock you, coming from CNN. I'll explain in a mini monologue tonight. And last night we told you how a teacher, well, ruined Santa for kids in class. We'll tell you about that. Also, we have an update, plus much, much more. Sit tight, buckle up. We have a big breaking news opening monologue that we begin with. After multiple delays, it has been a full year ruined in General Flynn's life. Robert Mueller's report on the former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, 3 stars, by the way, finally out, and he has been jerked around by this witch hunt for almost an entire year. And we know now he was coerced into pleading guilty only to a process crime, lying to investigators. Now, this despite fired FBI investigator James Comey, fired Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, and even Peter Strzokor interviewed him, saying that there were 0 indications that, in fact, Flynn ever lied, actually lied, when they were in charge of the investigation. We begin tonight with a report in Washington with our own Catherine Herridge. Catherine, I actually have a report that you did. If I can put my glasses on, I'll find out the date on this thing. May 4th. In it, House Intel report. Comey testified FBI agents saw no physical indications of deception by General Flynn.
That's right. That came, Sean, from testimony given to the House Intelligence Committee by the former FBI Director James Comey, as well as his deputy, Andrew McCabe. And that testimony was given several months apart. And they both reported the same thing, that agents saw no signs of deception. In other words, they didn't think Flynn was lying to them when he tried to relate his conversations and contacts with the Russian ambassador. So the question has always been, how do they get from, as McCabe said, a very poor foundation for a false statement case to a guilty plea for lying to federal investigators? I'm still going through the records now just to break it down and keep it simple. This sentencing memo from the special counsel Robert Mueller says that Flynn lied about 2 separate issues. One was his contacts with the Russian ambassador during the transition, and also his communications and business dealings with the Republic of Turkey. Based on his high level of cooperation with the special counsel, they are recommending the minimum on the sentencing spectrum, which would be no jail time, possibly probation. But what everyone is going to be talking about is what's called an addendum. This is the document that the special counsel has put forward